It's early morning in Taipei, and for a year straight, the Alvin virus has been downplayed, argued over, and folded into your usual political noise. By this point, people have learned how to live around it, and any news about it just seems like a gross over-exaggeration until one morning it wasn't. We see this exact baseline of normalcy play out right at the start of the film through our main character Jim. He's watching a virologist on his phone desperately trying to explain why the virus could still mutate into something far, far worse, but the talk show host just waves it away, points out there have been 0 deaths so far, tells the expert to stop fear-mongering, and with an election around the corner, he frames the whole warning as another manufactured political scare. Jim then steps out on his balcony, where he sees an elderly woman on a neighboring roof staring off into the distance. He calls to her and she turns around soaked in blood. But right as that happens, Jim gets distracted by his girlfriend Kat. When he looks back over, the elderly woman is gone. He shakes it off and has a brief exchange with his neighbor Mr. Lin, who casually dismisses the virus as media hysteria. After that, Jim continues through his morning commute like it's just another day. Now, in most zombie media, a bloody neighbor on the rooftop is the exact moment you lock your door and start packing your bags. But when you've spent a whole year being told the virus is fake, your brain will perform extreme levels of mental gymnastics to dismiss what you just saw. Unfortunately, in the sadness, failing to act at that moment is a huge mistake. So before we jump into the timeline, we need to talk about what a mutated Alvin virus actually does, because it fundamentally changes every single rule of outbreak survival. The infected in this world aren't your typical zombies. They aren't dead and they haven't lost their intelligence. The virus actually rewires the brain to connect sexual arousal with pure sadistic aggression. The infected can still function. They drive cars, use cell phones, use weapons, organize into groups, and taunt you by name while they hunt you down. And the most terrifying part is that they're fully aware of what they're doing, because the human part of them is still trapped inside, watching it happen. It's actually kind of fucked up if you think about it. In other words, you're not trying to survive a city of mindless flesh eaters here. You're trying to survive a city of 2.5 to 2.7 million sadistic psychopaths who are just as smart as you are and who want nothing more than to inflict as much pain on you as humanly possible. And because the Alvin virus has already been spreading through the population for a year, disguised as a harmless seasonal bug, there was no ground zero or quarantine zone. So the moment the virus mutated, the outbreak activated everywhere all at once. In cafes, on the street, and inside locked subway cars. So today we're going to follow Jim and Kat through the collapse of Taipei, break down the red flags the government and the public ignored, and figure out exactly why the last real window to leave finally closed. From there, we'll take a look at what trying to escape looks like when the infected could think clearly enough to still try and hunt you down. Alright, so what does your first window actually look like? This one is the invisible window, and most people will miss it. Jim and Kat have a short stretch from the moment they leave their apartment to the moment Kat walks through the station doors. They're together, they're mobile, the scooter's right there, and the road out of Taipei is still open. In that stretch, the city hands them 4 separate signals that the outbreak has already reached the streets. The first is the doctor on Jim's phone, trying to warn viewers that the Alvin virus could still mutate into something far worse. The second is his neighbor, who is visibly sick and refusing to see a doctor because he thinks the whole virus is a hoax. The third is the rooftop, where Jim saw the woman standing in bloody clothing on the building nearby. The fourth is a police scene. They pass it on the scooter, an active incident right on their road to the station. They see a man being arrested, and a body covered in a bloody sheet. Now, would a normal person turn around, pack their bags, and hightail it out of town based on any of those things? Probably not, which is exactly the problem. Everything they saw could have an easy explanation. So before Kat walked into the station, they needed to look at all 4 signals together instead of treating them as individual incidents, and recognize that too many strange things were piling up that morning. Unfortunately, this window closed the moment Kat walked through those station doors, and it closes without either of them ever knowing it. Okay, so window 2, this is the last chance window. After Jim dropped Kat off, on the way back he passes the same police scene from earlier, but this time the car is abandoned with all of its doors hanging open. The officers who were actively managing the scene a few minutes earlier were now gone. At this point, if your spider senses aren't going off, you should probably give your head a shake. On the way back, Jim decides to stop for breakfast where the bloodied woman from the rooftop appears. She walks into the little restaurant with her dirty ass feet and spits some kind of nasty stuff into another guy's face. After that, she grabs a tray with hot french fries and oil and dumps it all over the worker's head. Jim backs up outside where the old woman is eventually hit by a vehicle being driven by another infected person. At this point, the city is spiraling into chaos, but Jim still has one remaining exit left that looks anything like a viable one. After leaving the cafe, he gets chased by infected back to his apartment where he manages to get inside and lock the door. Once in there, he texts Kat to see if she's okay and tells her that he's coming for her. But mid-texting, his neighbor Mr. Lin attacks him and cuts off 2 of his fingers with garden shears. Jim manages to fight him off, wrap the injury, and get back to his moped. Now this is the last real chance he had to escape. His choices were trying to leave the city before it was completely lost, or trying to reach his girlfriend Kat. And out of curiosity, what would you guys do? Are you bailing on your girlfriend, or are you risky it all to try and reunite with her? Let me know in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you guys would do here. That being said, the city has not fully locked up yet, and Jim still has a vehicle. If he leaves Taipei instead of pushing back toward Kat, he has a slim window where movement is likely possible and he could still get out. But he doesn't take it. He's already set on making his way back towards Kat, and the decision to move toward her rather than away from the city is where the window finally closes. So once those two windows are gone, the question stops being when they had to leave and changes to what does survival look like from inside a city that's already past the point of escape. The train car is where the virus starts for Kat, a sealed environment with no exits while moving and a bunch of infected already inside. Once the carriage erupts, nobody has room to process it properly. People are boxed in, trying to figure out what's happening while the danger is ripping through the train. Fortunately, Kat manages to get off when the doors open and escape with another woman who was stabbed in the eyeball by an umbrella. But getting off the train does not mean they're safe. One of the infected who stabbed the woman in the eye followed them onto the platform and he just keeps on coming. He only gets held back for a moment when another person decides to step in. Unfortunately, said person gets their nose bitten off and takes an axe to the face. A few times. And that guy's sacrifice barely bought them enough time before a guy slams the door shut right behind them. And to thank him, Molly punches him right in the nose. That whole sequence shows what surviving after the window closes actually looks like. Kat gets out of the train, but the danger doesn't stay behind her. It follows her onto the platform, through the station, and right up to the exit. Now, after the train sequence, we jump back to Jim, who is now moving through the city after choosing Kat over his last good escape window. And now every blocky passage shows just how bad things have actually gotten. The city around him is no longer in that early, uncertain stage of an outbreak. Everything is now turned upside down. Along the way, Jim sees a group of guys attacking a restrained man in the streets. He tries to step in, but it turns out the man being attacked is also infected, and he's actually enjoying the beating. So they end up driving Jim away back towards his moped, where he makes an escape. What this part of the movie shows is that Jim's choice to head back into the city starts to cost him immediately. He's no longer moving through a place where the danger is obvious at a glance. Even a scene that looks like someone needing help can turn into another trap the second he gets close. Now we jump back to Kat arriving at the hospital to get help for her new friend that took an umbrella to the eye socket. This is where another important lesson takes place. When Kat gets there, the place still looks safe and intact. There's police at the entrance, the staff is moving patients around, but there's an issue. Hospitals become the first major concentration point in any outbreak because they're the obvious destination for anyone who's hurt or sick. Simply put, this is one of the absolute worst places to find yourself in an outbreak, especially a fast-moving one. And sure enough, one of the police officers there tells Kat that the emergency room is closed because it's been overrun by infected. Shortly after that, a broadcast comes on the TV to address the nation and tell them what's going on. And according to their data, there was an estimated nationwide infection of 15 to 20%, which works out to be about 4.5 million people. The president then apologizes for the delay and promises the government is confronting the situation swiftly and efficiently. And to make matters worse, then the waiting room starts to crack open from the inside. People begin shouting, shoving, and fighting with each other as the panic spreads through the crowd. One of the police officers moves towards the entrance, pulls his gun, and orders everyone to stay back since a few people were trying to reach for the door. He does manage to gain order for a little bit, but that lasts for all but 3 seconds. Because the infected businessman from the train appears on the other side of the glass with an axe in his hands. He smashes through the entrance, kills the officer with the same swing, which instantly turns the hospital from a crowded emergency room into another active kill zone. And that's what makes Kat's hospital choice dangerous in hindsight. The building still looked secure when she got there, but it was already one push away from collapse. And now Kat is trapped in one of the worst places to be during an active outbreak. So if there's one practical takeaway from the first half of this section, it's this. During an active outbreak, a hospital is probably one of the last places you want to be. Alright, so that being said, the infected businessman eventually finds Molly and does unspeakable things to her that I can't say on YouTube because I don't want to get banned or demonetized. This movie's already plenty gory and I'm sure they're loving that. Anyways, let's just say he lays her to rest. Shortly after that, Kat makes her way upstairs to a floor that's empty because of renovations. She's trying to put distance between her and the chaos below her. And when she gets there, she finally reaches Jim by phone. As they talk, he starts showing signs that something's wrong, but he still tells her he'll be there before hanging up. So Kat starts securing the door on the upper level while Jim makes his way over, but the infected businessman manages to force his way through. Kat does manage to get behind him with a fire extinguisher and finally puts him down, bringing the chase through the hospital to an end. But putting him down does not make the floor safe. Kat has only bought herself a few seconds before the noise draws more infected toward her, and that is when a doctor named Alan Wong pulls her behind the maternity ward doors. So for the first time since the train, she gets behind something that'll actually hold. Dr. Wong picked that room for a reason. The floor had been left empty during renovation, and maternity wards are built with heavy reinforced doors meant to keep unauthorized people out. And for the moment, it looks like Kat has finally found a place where the infected can't reach her. But then Wong points again at her and tells her to cuff herself to the shower pipe. It turns out Dr. Wong spent a full year trying to warn anyone who would listen that the Alvin virus would actually mutate, but nobody did. By the time Kat finds him, he has already crossed a line most people could never justify. He injected 8 abandoned infants with the virus to see if any of them might produce useful antibodies, then defended it by saying they would have died anyway if the infected had found them. Then he injects Kat in the back of the neck and uses the same logic. And he explains that if she turns, he will kill her. So that is the trade Kat made. The maternity ward keeps the infected out, but Wong controls the room. He has the gun, the keys, and the only plan for reaching the roof. Kat has finally reached a space that can hold, only to find herself trapped beside a person deciding whether she lives long enough to use it. While Kat is stuck in that room, Jim finally makes his way to the hospital. Kat is able to text him, but he's already slipping. A moment later, he drops the phone to the floor. When Jim reaches them in the hallway, the infection has already taken a hold of him. Wong fires once and grazes Jim's neck, then fires again, but the gun fails. Jim kills Wong, Kat takes his keys, gets to the rooftop gate, and locks it behind her before Jim can follow. When she gets to the roof, the helicopter is there, but it ends before we get to see if they got her out of there. So unfortunately, we don't get a clear answer for that. Alright, so let's wrap this thing up. I accidentally leaned a bit heavier on the movie recap angle on this one instead of analysis, which isn't really the goal of this series. Some recap is obviously required to make my points, but this movie was a lot more recap for sure. At least that's how it felt. Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, Jim and Kat had to leave before Kat ever got on that train. That was their absolute best window to get out of the city. Would it have guaranteed survival though? I think that's a little bit hard to say. But what I can tell you is that the odds are a lot better than being inside of the city. So getting out before the virus went full throttle would have absolutely been a better choice than sticking around. As for the warning signs they saw that morning, they should have set off some kind of alarm in their head, but unfortunately they failed to read the situation. They read them one at a time, gave each a surface level explanation, and kept going about their day. By the time the city confirmed what those signals actually meant, Kat was already inside the transit system and Jim was already riding home alone. Once that window closed, everything afterwards became damage control. Alright guys, if you made it to the end, I appreciate that as always, and don't forget I have a new channel. Or if you didn't know, well, now you do. People were requesting that I cover more movies, but they didn't quite belong on this channel, so I went and made a new one. The first video is up already, and if you're seeing this video, I should have 2 on there by now. Oh, and the link to the new channel is in the description and the pinned comment. Alright guys, I'll catch you next week.